Entering into a relationship, especially at a young age, it's difficult to recognize what lies behind tenderness and smiles. Everything seems sincere, but this is not always the case. To paraphrase a well-known saying, one can come to a simple conclusion: there may be only one step from adoring a child to murder. Amanda Mangas was a charming and attractive young woman. From an early age, she surrounded herself with a large number of friends, always being amiable and sociable. At the same time, she was not overly trusting and remained quite selective about her inner circle. Amanda was born and lived in the small town of Delta, located in the American state of Ohio, with a population of about 3,000 residents. She was most drawn to the humanities, adored children, and decided back in elementary school that she would become a kindergarten teacher or schoolteacher. Amanda placed great importance on education, as she aspired to secure financial stability for herself in the future. Therefore, the girl planned to first finish college and find a full-time job before starting to create her own family. However, reality turned out to be far from her idealized dreams. The relationship between Amanda's parents was not working out, conflicts constantly arose, and eventually they decided to divorce. When this happened, Amanda was only 13 years old, and she decided to stay with her dad. The man remarried rather quickly to a woman named Deborah, and the three of them began to live happily together. Among all her friends, Amanda especially singled out a boy named James Remy, whom she had known since kindergarten. The children grew up together, attended the same school, and became inseparable companions. During a summer job, Amanda became even closer with James, who was described as a funny and pleasant young man. Gradually, feelings ignited between them, the young lovers began dating, and after graduating from high school, their relationship grew into something more serious. Soon Amanda decided to move out of her parents' home and start living together with her boyfriend in James' apartment, as soon as she managed to find a part-time job. The girl started working in the kitchen of a local restaurant part-time to be able to combine earning money with her studies. Despite strong feelings, when Amanda introduced the boy to her family as her chosen one, they were not thrilled. James immediately did not appeal to them, even her stepmother expressed concern about this relationship. But Amanda was adamant, she was head over heels in love and considered all the warnings to be an exaggeration. The girl was convinced that she knew better how to act, while the adults looked at the situation more objectively. The young man behaved unusually, but Amanda continued to build a serious relationship despite her young age. After the couple started living together, James' behavior changed drastically for the worse. He began to increasingly control his girlfriend, constantly jealous and accusing her of infidelity. All this led to moral pressure on the heroine of this story. The worst fears of her family, which they had told her about earlier, began to become reality. Unfortunately, the inexperienced girl initially did not notice what was really happening in the relationship with her boyfriend. Amanda wanted to break up with him quite quickly, as he was too controlling and manipulative, but she was afraid. Jim was convinced that he had the right to control all aspects of her life, from her social circle to the clothes she wore every day. As soon as the girl left the house, even just to go to the store, within minutes regular phone calls would begin. The boyfriend was jealous of her literally to every lamppost, and the situation became even more aggravated when Amanda became pregnant. At first, Jim reacted to this news quite neutrally, but over time his dissatisfaction grew, as his beloved was paying less and less attention to him. She refused to terminate the pregnancy on his advice and decided to become a mother. Of course, all this required preparation, and Amanda completely devoted herself to this process. Naturally, this could not but affect the relationship, as the girl now divided her attention, which previously belonged entirely to Jim, also to preparing for the birth of the baby. The boyfriend continued to insist that he did not want this child and that it should be gotten rid of, but the heroine of the story refused to follow his demands. On May 21, 2016, a boy was born. By that time, Amanda's relationships were ruined with almost all her friends. James was constantly present at the hospital, which greatly interfered, as the girl wanted to see her relatives. Unfortunately, neither the boyfriend or the father and stepmother got along with each other. They could not stand each other's presence, so each meeting was accompanied by quarrels and mutual frayed nerves. It seemed that James was deliberately preventing communication with Amanda's loved ones. However, such behavior is typical for manipulators, which he was. Because of this, the father and stepmother never got to see their grandson while he was in the hospital with his mother. He first met his grandmother and grandfather when the baby was already 3 months old. All this time, Amanda could only correspond with them and send photos of the child via instant messengers. Over time, James became even more cruel and manipulative. The slightest little thing could infuriate him. Any problem would instantly inflate to incredible proportions, and the guy's favorite tactic was to reduce everything to accusations of infidelity, each time concluding that the child was not his. Such behavior greatly upset Amanda. The girl desperately resisted, but the struggle was not only with James, but also with postpartum depression and hormonal changes that are inevitable for many young mothers. The situation only worsened, until one day James not only verbally attacked Amanda, but also put a knife to her throat, threatening to kill her. Despite this, the girl continued to believe that for the sake of her son she would be able to keep the family together, and she tuned herself to this. She was convinced that the guy's aggression was solely due to the changes that had occurred in their young married life after the birth of the child. The young mother did not tell her relatives about this incident, but shared her experiences with several girlfriends. The manipulator intimidated her so much and ruined her relationships with loved ones that Amanda was simply afraid to turn to them for help. This often happens in such situations. Even the girl's friends understood that what was happening in her life was by no means normal. Considering the appearance of a child, James' behavior became increasingly dangerous. Moreover, the threat loomed not only over Amanda, but also over their son. Everyone advised the girl to break off the relationship with her boyfriend. Now she seriously thought about this decision, although it was not easy for her. Amanda remembered well how loving, caring and gentle James was at the beginning of their relationship, how many years they had been friends. However, the girl hoped that all this was temporary, that they both just needed time to adapt, so time after time she forgave any insults and even physical violence that the guy began to resort to. But this could not go on forever. One evening, after another quarrel, the young couple decided to go to a bar to drink, have fun and discuss what had happened. At this time, Amanda's mother came to look after the baby. The woman expected that she would have to spend only a couple of hours with the boy, but even after 3 hours, neither her daughter nor James had returned home. As it turned out, that evening the heroine's boyfriend had too much to drink, while Amanda did not drink, so she got behind the wheel to get home. But after driving only 2 blocks, James began to demand that she let him take the driver's seat. At first, the girl refused, but the guy began to get angry, so she gave in so as not to provoke a new conflict. Unfortunately, this turned out to be a reckless decision. Both young people were buckled up, but a few hundred meters later, James crashed into a parked car. The driver and passenger were hit at speed. James, who was thrown against the steering wheel, did not suffer serious injuries, while Amanda hit her head hard on the windshield, which shattered, cutting her. Despite the fact that the blame for the accident clearly lay with the guy, he immediately began to blame his girlfriend for everything. Amanda was in no mood to argue, as she was trying to stop the bleeding and was afraid that she might have received some dangerous injuries. But James, clearly not controlling himself, instead of calling an ambulance, began to get worked up over nothing, and verbal abuse quickly escalated into physical violence. He beat up his injured girlfriend. After this incident, Amanda Mangas realized that the guy had no human feelings for her. He turned out to be a cruel person who should have been kept away from the very beginning. First of all, the girl filed a police report, and also deleted her boyfriend from all contacts. After the accident and the assault, Amanda called her father and asked him to take her and the child home. Thus, the Mangas family was reunited again. The girl obtained a restraining order against James and believed that now she and her son were safe. The guy really quieted down for a while, but they did not suspect that the greatest difficulties and dangers were still ahead. Having returned to her parents' home, Amanda started living with her parents again, as before. The girl decided to start all over again, wanting to forget these unhealthy relationships, to simply erase the painful period of life and James from her memory. She got a job at a restaurant again, this time as a waitress. It was the same establishment frequented by the residents of the small town, many of whom Amanda knew well. The girl resumed communication with the residents of Delta, got acquainted with new people and made friends. Amanda was a very extroverted person and easily made contact, so she quickly became a favorite of all the visitors of the establishment. Things were going well, gradually the bitterness of past grievances was receding. The girl earned quite well for her age and could provide for herself and the baby, so she began to look for an apartment to rent in order to move out from her parents. They got along great, but to create a full-fledged family, the house area was clearly not enough. While working at the restaurant, Amanda met a young man named Curtis, whom she often crossed paths with back in school, but at that time they hardly communicated. The girl became interested in him and realized that he was a very nice guy. A rapprochement began between them. Curtis actively supported Amanda and helped her in many things. This grew into mutual feelings. The young lovers were drawn to each other. The guy warmly accepted Amanda's son from her previous relationship, repeatedly assuring that he treated him as his own, and the girl saw the sincerity of these words. Finally, on March 13, 2017, the heroine of the story decided to officially tell about her relationship with this young man, not even suspecting how it could all turn out. On her social media pages, Amanda changed her relationship status from single to in a serious relationship. She immediately noted that her connection with her new chosen one was deep and meaningful. On the same day, Curtis moved into the house of his beloved, and now they lived as one big family together with the baby, the heroine's father and her stepmother. The young couple planned to rent a separate apartment in the near future in order to start a full-fledged life together and build their own family. On Tuesday, March 14, 2017, Curtis had to wake up very early, as his workday started before 5 in the morning. Of the adults in the house, only Amanda, who was still sleeping, and her stepmother Deborah remained. The 10-month-old boy was also peacefully resting in his crib. Suddenly, around 6 o'clock, the stepmother was awakened by a loud sound, resembling a shot or the fall of something heavy and fragile. Barely opening her eyes, the woman could not understand what had happened. The sound resembled either a shot or as if something big had shattered. So Deborah decided to get out of bed and check what was the matter. She called out to Amanda by name, but instead of an answer, she only heard some suspicious noise, and then the sound of quick footsteps approaching her room. The woman realized that everything pointed to an intruder breaking into the house. To avoid the danger of an attack, she quickly locked the bedroom door from the inside and pressed her whole body against it, trying to prevent the criminal from bursting inside. But without thinking twice, he simply shot the door lock, wounding Deborah in the process. The bullet grazed her thumb, passing very close by, but miraculously the woman did not suffer serious injuries, although she found herself right in the line of fire. Now nothing could restrain the door, so the criminal simply kicked it in and broke into the bedroom. It was a man in a mask who was holding a weapon in his hands. He looked very agitated and kept looking around as if expecting an attack or a blow. The stranger glanced at Deborah and asked where Curtis was. Obviously, he was looking for the young man. But instead he saw a woman in pajamas and was confused. Deborah replied that Curtis had already left for work about half an hour ago. This information only infuriated the intruder. He admitted that he had shot Amanda, and threatened to kill anyone who dared to stand in his way without hesitation. So he demanded unconditional obedience from Deborah. After that, the bandit ordered the woman to take her mobile phone, and also to give him the child. Deborah tried to object, but he silently and menacingly cocked the gun. The woman realized that now was not the time for arguments. She carefully took the baby out of the crib, but did not hurry to hand him over to the stranger. Instead, she said that she would carry the child herself. She also gave the criminal Amanda's mobile phone, which he demanded. After that, the man put the barrel of the gun to the back of Deborah's head and forced her to leave the house, not even allowing her to change clothes. Despite the rather cold weather, the woman found herself on the street barefoot, dressed only in pajamas. The bandit put her in the car, and then took off his mask. And then Deborah recognized the kidnapper. It was James. He explained that he needed an escort. The guy planned to escape from the city with the child, and intended to use Deborah as a hostage. James demanded that the woman show him the safest escape route to avoid meeting police patrols. When the car had driven a few hundred meters away from the house, the kidnapper ordered Deborah to call an ambulance. He reported that the wounded Amanda was left in the house and could still be saved. So James insisted that the woman call the emergency service and report this. Deborah obeyed and immediately contacted the 911 dispatcher. She reported that there was an injured girl in the house who urgently needed medical help. The woman barely had time to give the address when the dispatcher asked for more details about the incident. But at that moment, the criminal snatched the phone from Deborah. The police arrived at the scene within minutes. The first to arrive were the patrolmen, who immediately noticed that the front door was not locked. As soon as the law enforcement officers were inside, one of them heard an alarming moan. They followed the sound and found themselves in Amanda's room. The young mother was lying on the bed covered in blood, but still alive. At first, the officers assumed that it was a suicide attempt, so they asked her the weapon was that the girl had shot herself with. Considering her possible inadequate condition, the police wanted to protect themselves from another shot and to ensure Amanda's safety as well. But the girl did not know where the gun was and it was nowhere to be seen nearby. It became obvious that someone else had shot her. Amanda asked where her child was. One of the officers noticed a crib in the room, but it was empty. When asked who had taken her son, the girl still managed to answer, James Remy. And then she lost consciousness. When the medics tried to help the young mother, she was already on the verge of life and death. Amanda was immediately taken to the hospital, where the 23-year-old girl later died. At this time, Curtis and Amanda's father were at work. They had no idea what was happening in their home, as Deborah was still being held hostage and could not notify anyone about the events. The police also did not have time to find out all the details, but they managed to learn that Deborah and the 10-month-old baby were probably in the hands of the criminal as hostages. Law enforcement officers immediately raised the alarm to warn local residents about the danger. An armed criminal with hostages in a car was at large. Meanwhile, Deborah with the child in her arms and James were speeding in the car away from the city. The kidnapper intended to get to the airport and demanded that the woman help him do this. The whole way he was very nervous. On the way there was a railroad crossing, and James saw that the barrier was lowering before an approaching train. The young man was so agitated that he did not even try to brake, but on the contrary, stepped on the gas. However, the rails were raised quite high, and the car crashed into them at full speed with such force that the vehicle suffered serious damage. Although the car jumped over the tracks, not only it was damaged, but also the barrier itself. After driving a few more dozen meters, the car with James and the hostages finally stopped. It could no longer move. The guy realized that he was at an impasse and needed help. So he took out his mobile phone and called his friend. Quite quickly, a van drove up to them, in which there was a woman with 2 children. James, Deborah and little William got into this car, which took them to a house at an unknown address. It seemed that the driver of the van lived here. They entered the house where James' friend lived. The kidnapper sat his hostage and the baby on the sofa. He was still in a state of great agitation and continued to nervously pace the room back and forth, holding a gun in his hands. After some thought, the criminal decided to take his friend's car and continue his journey in order to leave the country. Taking advantage of a moment when James was distracted, Deborah asked to go to the bathroom. The kidnapper allowed it, but insisted that his friend accompany the woman. However, he did not go inside the bathroom itself. Left alone, Deborah tried to escape through the window in the bathroom. Unfortunately, this attempt was unsuccessful. By that time, the woman who had picked them up near the railroad tracks had already left the house with the children. She realized that the police might come here and was afraid of getting caught in the crossfire during a possible shootout. No one wanted to risk their lives, especially when children were nearby. James continued to be nervous. He hastily took the hostages and hurried to leave. The guy did not trust anyone and suspected that the woman with the van could have contacted the police. The young criminal was behind the wheel, unable to calm down. He smoked cigarette after cigarette to somehow relax and focus on the road. Suddenly the lighter stopped working. James decided to stop at the nearest gas station to buy a new one. He sternly warned Deborah not to try to escape or attract attention to herself, otherwise she would be shot. After that, the criminal went into the store at the gas station and for the first time since the escape got into the field of view of surveillance cameras. The gas station security also noticed the suspicious young man. But no one had any idea how dangerous this stranger was. At this time, an urgent message began to be broadcast over the loudspeaker in the store. It was a warning from the police, which was accompanied by a photograph of the wanted criminal. Law enforcement officers informed local residents about the abduction of Deborah and the baby. In addition, they reported the tragic news: Amanda did not survive the attack and died in the hospital without regaining consciousness. She received a fatal bullet wound to the chest. Although James dealt with his ex-girlfriend with his own hands, it seemed that the news of her untimely death deeply saddened him. He returned to the car only for the lighter and refused to go further. Instead, the guy just stood there, pondering his next steps. James began to reason aloud about the possible consequences of his actions, and then told Deborah about his monstrous plan. He had only 5 bullets left. One was intended for the boy, another for the hostage, and the remaining 3 he was going to use in a confrontation with the police. James hoped that this would be enough to shoot the police officers and take possession of their weapons. This was Plan B. If it also failed, then the kidnapper had one last bullet for himself. The young man found himself in a hopeless situation. He clearly was not going to surrender and spend the rest of his life behind bars. Instead, James was ready to try to escape or take his own life if the escape failed. After this terrifying statement, they set off. Deborah felt even more anxious and acutely realized the reality of the danger that threatened her. Meanwhile, the police reached the gas station too late. The criminal with the hostages had already managed to leave from there. Now the FBI intervened in the case, which was able to track the approximate direction of the fugitives' movement. However, James was still several hours ahead of law enforcement. To catch him, police units from all the surrounding cities and even neighboring states joined the operation. The case reached a federal scale, but despite all efforts, no progress was made in the next few hours. Deborah and the baby were still in the hands of a desperate criminal. The police closely monitored their movements. The car of the kidnapper's accomplice was again caught on surveillance cameras, this time at another gas station, a couple of 100 kilometers from the previous one. James stopped here too, ordering Deborah to stay in the car and threatening to kill her if she dared to call for help. Despite this, the woman was desperate and wanted to tell anyone who could help about her predicament. But she did not even know exactly where they were now. Deborah understood that it was far from home, and the locals might not even be aware of the kidnapping and murder. In the end, the hostage decided not to take risks, but to rely on the fact that the police were making every effort to save her and the baby. At this gas station, James bought beer, a new lighter and used the restroom. When he returned, Deborah also asked to go to the toilet. Of course, in light clothing and without shoes, she looked too suspicious, so the kidnapper gave her a jacket and sneakers. This delay turned out to be very appropriate, because it gave the hostage a little more time. The criminal closely watched her from the car, so Deborah did not dare to ask outsiders for help. As soon as she returned, James abruptly drove off. A chase began. The police finally got on the trail of the car. The gas station employee recognized the kidnapper from the orientation and called law enforcement. On the road, James behaved extremely aggressively. At some point, Deborah tried to move closer to the boy to cover him with her body in case of a shootout. But the kidnapper did not allow this. The child remained in the back seat. Suddenly he stopped the car, took the baby himself and put him on his lap. Meanwhile, police officers with weapons at the ready were approaching and surrounded the car in Fulton County, Indiana. Despite all the threats and inadequate behavior, James never opened fire, neither on the hostages, nor on law enforcement officers, nor on himself. Instead, he handed the child over to the cops and surrendered. Finally, the terrible adventures of Deborah and the baby came to an end. The woman could not believe that they were saved. She didn't even cry, she simply fainted from nervous exhaustion. The funeral of 23-year-old Amanda, who was loved and respected, was attended by over 100 people. The girl was cremated. The investigation proved that the reason for James' inadequate actions was banal jealousy. In the morning, he saw that his ex had changed her relationship status on social networks, and this threw him off balance. The guy decided to deal with Amanda, which he had previously threatened her about. But the girl did not take these threats seriously, and in vain. James immediately armed himself and went to the house of his ex-girlfriend's father, hoping to catch her in bed with another. But Curtis was no longer at home, so the bullet only got Amanda. If her new boyfriend had been at home, he would have suffered the same fate. 27-year-old James was charged with premeditated murder, kidnapping of 2 people and other less serious crimes. In the end, the defendant pleaded guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to life imprisonment with the right to parole after 27 years. Deborah was amazed that Amanda had lived until the arrival of the police, and it was she who managed to report the abduction of the child and stepmother. The girl named the attacker, and this played a crucial role in saving at least 2 innocent lives. Deborah still feels that she is indebted to the deceased girl, so she took responsibility for raising the little boy. Now the boy is cared for by his grandfather and grandmother, the father and stepmother of the murdered Amanda. That's all for now. Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Give this video a thumbs up and be sure to subscribe to my channel so you don't miss any future content. Take care and goodbye.